Welcome to the Awakening Women podcast. I'm your host, Leanne Oaten, and for almost a decade, I have been a transformation coach and therapist. This podcast is all about lifting the veil of consciousness and awakening to the truth. It is also about helping you to raise the bar in all areas of your life and relationships by starting with you. If you're ready to take back your personal power and reclaim your life, you have come to the right place. I'm so glad that you're here, so let's get started with today's episode. Welcome to this edition of the Awakening Women podcast. It's Leanne here, and I am going to be diving into something that really has gotten me feeling very fired up and passionate this week, just based on a post that I put on Instagram that received a lot of feedback, and then I went into our podcast discussion group, and there was more feedback all around negative and horrific traumatizing experiences going to a therapist with a narcissistic partner. Not necessarily just going to a therapist as for a couples therapy, but also going on their own to get support in the relationship. And a lot of times women are not aware that what they're experiencing is abuse, and the therapists miss it and they give the wrong advice. They apply the wrong therapeutic interventions, not being able to screen their clients for possible domestic violence of the emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse nature. That is, sometimes it is subtle and it's harder to identify. This was something that when I had my private therapy practice and just worked with clients on an hourly basis, which I don't do anymore, but I would be working with a woman and assessing what's going on for her, do a pretty thorough assessment, and be able to really identify that what she was experiencing was indeed emotionally abusive, and she didn't know. This happened on so many occasions I can't even count. But I think for me, I was able to identify that because it's something I myself have experienced, and so I could really sense into that. And granted, there are lots of therapists out there that don't have that kind of life experience, which, thank goodness, wouldn't want anyone to have that experience. But I do believe those therapists that do specialize in narcissistic abuse, they understand the abuse cycle. They understand what gaslighting and stonewalling and blame shifting, and when someone's partner isn't taking responsibility, or when they're dominating or controlling. There are those that don't have the radar to know when something's up. And I want to be clear, I am not dissing or knocking therapists at all, because when they're trying to help their clients, hopefully, they are coming at it from the place of do no harm and trying to look at it from a balanced place. And I wouldn't say it's intentional. They're probably well-meaning, applying their interventions to the situation. But the fact of the matter is that there are way too many therapists that are practicing that don't even have baseline knowledge or awareness around what emotional abuse looks like. Covert emotional abuse. Sure, if you're being called a bitch and horrible names and being sworn at and things thrown at you or being hit, any therapist hopefully would be like, oh, that's abuse. But this is different when it is covert abuse. It's a lot harder to pinpoint. And again, it's not to blame any therapist or blame anyone. It's not what this is about. This is about just having awareness of the actual problem. So this gets missed. And I will say, I did a specialized program to come out the other side with the education to open my doors as a therapist. So I don't have a master's or a PhD or anything like that, but I did go to a specialized college to get my diploma in counseling psychology, because I knew all I wanted to do was open up a practice and help women. That's what I knew. And I knew that I didn't want to be a social worker, and I knew that I didn't want to be in school for half my life. Like, I knew all of those things. And I've shared the story a little bit before around where I struggled with that because I didn't want to be an academic. I didn't want to be in school for years and years and years. I had little kids. It just wasn't for me. And I came across a program that was like the answer to what I was looking for, was what I could come out the other side and become a counselor. And so I did this really in-depth program. I mean, really, it was a phenomenal program that I came out the other side being able to be a registered professional counselor and open my practice. And that's what I did for quite a few years. So I did work a lot of one-to-one in office sessions as a counselor would. I do not operate the same way anymore. My business looks very, very different now in how I work. But the point being is that I can look back and be able to see that I had that awareness because of my own life experience, my ability to tap into what a client is saying, to be able to notice when something was off that would point me in a direction that maybe she is being emotionally abused and manipulated, and be able to dig deeper into that. Now, most therapists don't have that ability. For one, no training. And what I was getting at, I guess, with what I was just sharing is there was no training on this is what covert narcissistic abuse looks like. This is what narcissistic traits present as. This might be what your client is presenting if she's being abused. None of that, right? And it's not to knock the program at all. As I said, it was a fascinating and amazing program that left me coming out the other side feeling like a very competent counselor, able to work with people because I had such good in-depth training. But there was only just a skimming of personality disorders and narcissism, as you would see it in the DSM manual, that is like grandiose and thinks highly of themselves and thinks they're Mr. Wonderful and all these things. Well, that's not always the case. That's not how all narcissistic men present. And here we're talking about men. They don't always present with those grandiose traits. Some are very covert. Some are very passive aggressive because they don't want to come across as angry. So they'll never, ever outright use anger. But it comes out in passive aggressive, covert manipulation and psychological emotional abuse. So therapists miss this. So not only are we talking about this if you yourself is to go to a therapist for help because you're struggling, you are at the end of your rope, you're exhausted, you are full of anxiety, you are struggling in your relationship, and maybe you're not quite sure what's going on, and it gets missed. And you're given advice that is intended for regular relationships where you're not with someone with narcissistic tendencies or traits. And that's where the problem is. And then there's also the other side when you go in with your partner who's narcissistic and just witness how everything gets actually turned around on you with the therapist not being aware of what's going on. So your partner is very good at saying, well, she does this and she overreacts here and she said this to me once and she flips her lid, or she is depressed, that's why there's so many problems, or she has stuff in her past and that's why there's these problems, or she's cold and she's mean, she's angry, she reacts, whatever it may be. Somehow it ends up getting turned around to where you're in session and all of a sudden you're the problem. It's pretty uncanny how that can happen. So like really, it's freaky. It's actually very scary. And as I was talking with women about this in the communities, the Awakening Women Support communities, I just could see how prevalent and huge of a problem this is. And I am only one person. I am only one person. And I feel like it's such a big issue. Now, how do we solve this issue? Sure, it would be great if there were more therapists who had the training of what to spot. They had the ability to assess their clients and notice when maybe something is off, to know how women present in session when they're being abused, that it's not maybe just depression, that it's that she's being abused. Maybe it's not that she's has an eating disorder just for the sake of eating disorder, but maybe it's that she's in an abusive situation. Maybe the anxiety and panic attacks and insomnia aren't just from anxiety, but the anxiety is from the relationship. So being able to really identify that and assess for that with all therapists would be phenomenal. That would be awesome. But I don't think that that's going to happen. So as therapists, it's our duty, if we're working with clients, to be able to assess, is this woman in an abusive relationship? Now, of course, not all counselors work with just women, but I'm just speaking in the context from how I do things. Of course, if you're listening to this and you are a therapist, I know there was a therapist in the feed on Instagram that said, I'm training to be a therapist and I want to educate myself. I think she said, where do I start, or where's your podcast? I can't remember. So if more therapists are listening to this and they're aware, then they're going to be that much more able to spot when their client says, well, my partner tells me I'm crazy. My partner doesn't listen to me. Every time I try and talk to my partner, it turns into a fight. These are things that therapists are overlooking. And then they say, oh, well, are you using assertive communication? Are you being intense? Right? I had that told to me once, that you have intense energy. Well, yeah, okay, right? It's like it always ended up being somehow like it was my fault, right? And I do have intense energy. I get that. But you know what? When somebody is mistreating you, you have a right to have intense energy. You don't have to be abusive back, but you can have intense energy. That's totally cool. And the person that doesn't like your intense energy because they're abusing you and they don't like your reaction, that's just too fucking bad. But on my Instagram post, if you check it out, so when this comes out, which is where are we? What day is it? October 20th. There's a post that I put on that says, most therapists and counselors are not trained in detecting and treating the dynamics of covert narcissistic abuse in an intimate relationship. Do your research. So as I said, because this is probably not going to be something that is going to change unless there are more therapists that are aware and they educate themselves by going on YouTube, by listening to podcasts like this, by starting to do some research and noticing what are some things that a woman might be saying, experiencing, or presenting as that points toward maybe she's in a abusive or narcissistic relationship. To have that ability to detect that is what's necessary. So it starts with us first and foremost, because we can't put this on external. We can't point fingers and say it's their fault. We need to take an empowered approach. An empowered approach. My goodness, I'm having trouble talking today. I'm just so fired up. My tongue is tied. So there's this two-prong kind of approach, is like we ourselves need to educate ourselves. So the first thing that I would say is be part of the solution. Number one is to do your research. If you're going to find a therapist, interview the therapist. Ask them, have you had any experience working with narcissistic abuse? Do you have any experience with trauma? Are you a trauma-informed therapist? If so, how do you work with trauma? Also, do you know like the cycle of abuse? Like ask open-ended questions so that they can answer. Like, are you aware of how to treat covert abuse? Now, of course, this would only be happening if you yourself are aware of what you're experiencing. This leaves out the category of women who don't actually know what they're experiencing. They just think it's a really stressful, difficult relationship, and they think it's their fault. They need to get help. So there's that side of things. This would be one thing I would say big time that I started to notice, is that the women that were in abusive relationships were the ones that were most convinced that it was all their fault. So they're coming to therapy because my partner says I need to get therapy. And then my spidey sense would be going off. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, let's dive into that more. So those kinds of things where they're talking about their partner in certain ways, along with how they're presenting, are the two indications. But if you are someone that's not sure, you don't even recognize what's going on, that's a whole other problem. And that is something that where there's a big gap in the counseling and therapy field. Huge gap. Even with psychologists with PhDs would miss this probably. I've heard this many, many, many times, so many women, and they all say the same things. I have learned more in these few weeks in ETC than I have in years of going to therapy every week or going to a psychologist to figure this out. So I think the answer is, number one, there needs to be education for therapists that are going to be working, even in social work, of course, about this whole other side of narcissistic abuse, that it doesn't always look textbook, right? It does, but it doesn't. I always say with the women that share their stories, there is a textbook and there's a prototype, because they all do say and behave in similar ways. But when you look at a textbook definition of narcissism or narcissist or NPD, it doesn't always show up like that in a covert narcissistic situation. So to be part of the solution, you need to do your research and start, saying when you are talking to counselors, like, I am having a real problem finding someone that can help me with XYZ. I know I'm experiencing narcissistic abuse. I just don't know what to do about it. I need somebody that can help me. And therapy is wonderful if you are working with a skilled clinician that can actually help empower you and lead you. But what therapy tends to be is just a place to go vent every week, and you don't actually get anywhere. That was the part of therapy that it didn't work for me, because I have, I guess, a skill or a gift to be able to move my clients and the women I work with, because I don't want them to stay stuck for months. And that's why ETC is the 30-day intensive, because I intentionally created it that way so that women who have been to therapy for years and years and years trying to fumble about and figure it out on their own, getting nowhere, can come and get everything in 1 month that they need as far as answers go, and experience a very quick win, like a quick breakthrough where they're like, oh my God, I have all of the pieces here now in front of me that were missing. I didn't want it to be another 3-month, 4-month, 6-month process for you to get your answers, because you've already tried all this therapy that doesn't work. Many of you have shared the horror stories of going to therapists that are unaware. So the first one, do your research. Challenge the therapists to say, like, why do you not have training to work with clients who are experiencing this? Do a little bit of investigating. But definitely they should understand the cycle of violence. They should know about narcissistic abuse and the tactics that we are talking about here, like the gaslighting and all that. They should be able to detect that and go, oh, well, that's actually abusive. That's actually emotionally abusive. That is sexually abusive. That is manipulative, right? To be able to define it, to say that's what's going on here. So now what? So do your research, interview therapists, ask for referrals if you are wanting to go to a therapist. And I've said many times, do not go to therapy with your partner. That's just my piece. I mean, you're going to do what you're going to do. I have not heard of any situation of a woman going to therapy with their partner who is narcissistic and had it go well. The second thing is, this is an ask for all of you, is to share this podcast with more women. So share it on your social media. You don't have to say, hey, I'm in this type of relationship, check this out. Just to say, hey, I'm spreading the word because this message is so important. You don't have to announce on a billboard that that's what you're experiencing, but sharing this stuff out on Instagram, tag me on Instagram, like screenshot the show and just say, every woman needs to listen to this to be more aware, or something like that, because it is so prevalent. So that is my call to you, is to share this out. Share it on your social media. Mention it to your therapist and say, there's this person I follow. I've had clients and members of my program do this, that they share with their therapist what program they're in, because their therapist is like, I can't even believe the change I've seen in you. I've heard this so many times. Where the therapist is like, who are you working with? Because I've seen a massive shift in you in the last while of your empowerment and your boundaries and everything. So mention the podcast to your therapist and just say, like, there's tons of stuff on here so you can have a better idea of what I'm actually experiencing. And this Leanne Oaten chick, that's all she talks about. So go check out her podcast. So that's another thing you can do. The next thing is that you could share your story in ways that you feel safe doing. in ways that feel okay. I'm not saying put a big post up on Facebook and vent it out. I don't even think that's the best way to do it. But just finding ways that you can talk a little bit about your story, just so we're having more of the conversations. I was in a meeting today with someone I'm hiring to be my personal assistant and help me with my admin stuff and my business end of things. And we started on the topic because she's like, well, what caused this massive explosion in your business? And I was like, well, I think it's more just about what I'm talking about, to be honest. I'm sharing, and I don't share my personal details a whole lot publicly. I do share a lot more of them with my clients and in our ETC program, because women ask me. I don't share a lot of my stuff publicly. I just don't think that's necessary. But I do share a lot. I share a lot of my experience and all of that. So I think that's part of it. But we have to start with opening the dialogue. So you could just post things up and say, like, I've experienced this. You don't have to go into details. Or you can share articles, or as I said, share the podcast. Just put it out there to say, ladies, you need to inform yourself, because maybe if you're not experiencing it, someone you know probably is. Please go listen to this podcast or listen to this episode. That's my call to you, because you're my listeners, to help me spread this message to more women, because that therefore is going to create a ripple effect. If they're sharing it, then someone they are on their Facebook or Instagram is like, oh, what's this? Oh, this is what I'm experiencing. Oh my goodness. There are so many women behind closed doors trapped in this type of dynamic, and they don't even know it. So the more we talk about it and share and use social media for the good instead of the useless gossip channel that it often is, use it for good. Use it to spread what it is that you want to spread and share. There's a way to do it without having to air your personal details. The fourth thing here is to go to episode 172, because that is an episode I did on what to consider when you're looking for a therapist. As I said, I am a former therapist. I don't practice as a therapist per se. I work on a very different level in group settings with ladies, and I only take on a couple of clients a year. And I do that on a really in-depth level, and there is a considerable investment, we will say, to be able to do that. So I don't offer one-off sessions or anything like that. But if you want to work with me, my End the Cycle 30-day group intensive is how to do that. But if you're looking for, you want to find somebody locally, or you want to actually work with someone to talk to someone, do your due diligence and research them. And so episode 172 is where I really walk you through what are the things to consider and ask. And then the last is to educate yourself on what is actually abuse, right? You can know you're in a situation that is toxic or even emotionally abusive, but you might not recognize, and very likely don't recognize, like 80% of what's going on that is abusive. You're missing some of it. And the more we talk about it and call it out, like that's abuse, the more it's going to ripple out. Now, you know me, I'm not about going into victim mentality. So if we are in an abusive, toxic situation, there is a part we play in that, not in the abuse, but we play a part by how we play into the dance, how we fit into the dynamic to allow it to continue. Again, not placing blame, not about blame. It's about taking responsibility and going, oh, I've been in 4 of these type of relationships. Are all men narcissists? Well, no, I don't think all men are. It's just that you have that view, that vantage point, because you, for some reason, are a match, so to speak, for that type of person. And we have to figure out why that is. And then we share around that. Okay, this is what the other side of this looks like. Because the best solution is our self-empowerment. That's going to ripple out into other generations, other women in our lives. If you are in the coaching industry or you work in this field of helping clients, Your best asset is you, and growing and healing and transforming you first is what is going to be the most powerful. So those are some ideas and some thoughts that I have around this massive issue that I see. I'm going to be making a part 2 of this episode. It's going to be a bit of a doozy because I want to prepare and really make sure that I articulate everything really well and really clear as a resource for therapists. I'm going to do a podcast and I'm going to have a companion guide that has all of the, not all, but a lot of the feedback that I've received word for word from women with their permission, sharing their experiences. So that is coming because I feel like, I can't take on the world and solve all the world problems, but I can do something. And that's what I'm going to do. So that is coming. And then that way, if you are working with a therapist, you can say this is the episode to go to where she's actually speaking to therapists that are working with women in my situation and point them to it. It's just a small thing, but it could very well make a difference. You never know. For me, when I get fired up about a big problem like this, I'm like, what can I do about it? I want to save the world. But I have to be careful I don't go into that mode because I do not want to actually save the world. But I would like to be part of the solution to figure this problem out because it's a big, big problem, a huge problem. Women are being harmed in therapy. That's fucked up, right? You go to therapy because you need help. The other thing, a whole other can of worms, is going to a lawyer. How many times have I heard women talking about lawyers that don't understand what the hell they're dealing with because they don't have any education? So the more we talk about it and the more helping professionals are educating themselves around these important issues, the more it's going to spread and the more awareness there's going to be. That is the most important thing, is just the awareness piece. So that wraps up this episode on how you can be part of the solution around this issue around trying to get therapy in a situation like this and feeling alone. I mean, going to a therapist with your most vulnerable issues and you are traumatized on some level, you are already feeling very raw and vulnerable, and you're like, hey, I need your help. And this therapist handles it, mishandles it, maybe unintentionally, which leaves you feeling even worse. And for me, when I open my therapy practice, because I've had many of these scenarios, my main goal is I cannot fix other people's problems, but my goal is I want to leave each person that I have been in contact with in session, and I continued on with my Zoom calls when I'm doing it with my groups. I want to leave them feeling even just a little bit better off than they did when we first started. So with my therapy, it was I want them to walk away from the office feeling even just a little bit better than they did when they got here. A little bit more empowered, a little bit more feeling like they could do something about their situation. And so I've carried that intention through all of my work with my clients. And if everybody was to take that stance when they're in this type of industry, especially, it would make a world of difference. But I think a lot of therapists just sit there taking notes, watching the clock. Okay, our time is up. I just don't think that method or model is super effective. So that's why I got out of that, if we'll air quote, the industry, but I'm not knocking it because obviously if you are working with the right therapist, it can be very healing and therapeutic, but the therapist needs to have the skills to move you forward, which I think a lot of them tend to lack, or there's so much in the therapy model that they're just listening and they're not giving any leadership. And that's where I think where my style kind of merges into this coaching, solution-focused method to help women actually move forward. So, biggest bottom line, do your research. Do not just find the first person in your phone book and book them in. Go through and write down a few and call them and interview them and ask them, like, what I just said, and then go listen to episode 172 for more on selecting a therapist. So I hope this is helpful and that you'll take something from this. Again, screenshot this episode and share it in your Instagram stories or on your Facebook feed, and just encourage women to spread the word. I think it's important that we are all fearlessly and courageously doing this, and the more we do it, the more awareness we will spread, which will create a ripple effect across the entire globe, essentially. If we keep, social media reaches all over the world. The furthest client I've ever worked with is a client that lives in Dubai, I think she moved to. How cool is that? To be able to reach women from that far through social media. So use social media for the good and help me spread the word about this message and podcast. All right, talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. I so appreciate that you chose to take the time to tune in and hang out with me this week. If you love the show and it has benefited you at all, please do me a huge favor and leave a 5-star rating and review in the iTunes app. For more transformational content, make sure to follow Awakening Women's Support on Instagram and come and check out our new podcast discussion group on Facebook. I look forward to seeing you online. Bye for now.